see. So that should be fine. I'll maybe move this a little bit closer. Alright, that should be okay.
Works.
It works? Right, okay. I'll post up the link below everyone who happens to tune in. So, yeah, let's wait a minute or two more.
Kawa, herbata, kolorami. Kawa, zielona, herbata, czarna herbata. Mleko, siano.
Good morning, John, hello.
Wegański przekąs.
So that's all set up now. I'm probably doing an article about my project for the people who made the Mobility Atlas, also of Bern. But basically to explain the eyewitness experience I have from the ground. So that as a follow-up.
So if anyone needs the atlas and doesn't want to take the paper version, there's a QR code over there if you want to just download it from the website.
Excellent.
For those with limited cargo space.
Yeah, at the moment I'm trying to restrict what I carry with me. At the moment I have a rail map of Finland and a special jersey from the European EU Agency for Railways, which it was too good to not take it with me. But trying to plan a trip like this with a bicycle, I have to be very limited in what to transport. Anyway, let's make a start because we also have the live stream going, and if other people join us, then let's do that. I'm not quite certain what will happen. There are a number of other people who said that they would come but aren't here. But anyway, people's plans change, so no problem. So good morning and thank you all for coming, and thank you Heinrich Böll Stiftung here in Warsaw for hosting the event. I appreciate that very much. Because it also means then we can bring people together and have a conversation about these topics. For those of the people who are watching on the YouTube stream, please post your questions either underneath the YouTube channel if you want to, or better still on Twitter, and then those questions will be posed here in the event, and then I will answer the questions in the live video once I've completed my presentation. So, behind me there are the slides which I'm going to explain. I hope I maybe need to move a fraction so those of you over the side can see. This is a picture taken yesterday with the drone from the cross-border line between Mariampole and Suwałki, if I say that correctly. I've been saying it wrong in the project until now. On the Polish side of the border. This is about 5 kilometers into Poland and about 20 kilometers from Suwałki. You see here, and I'll show the detail later on, the track is not in the best condition here on the Polish side, but I will talk about the details of that. And indeed, eventually there will also be drone video footage from that border, but I just simply haven't had time to edit the drone video just yet. It's also worth saying that in the project, everything I gather, all the data, all the photos, everything will be made publicly available. So if you need any photos of any railway things to or from Poland at the borders, it will all be available for whatever publications or whatever purposes that may be applicable to you. Right, so what is the problem with cross-border railway connections, first of all? National railway systems in Europe work comparatively well, but once you cross a border, everything gets worse. The timetables are often worse, ticketing is more complicated, trains run less regularly, they're less reliable, it's harder to book them. They are, as we discover, also at the Poland-Lithuania border, but not only there. They were the first trains to get cancelled in the COVID pandemic, and they are among the last trains to be reactivated after the COVID pandemic. Now, if we want people to take trains internationally as well as nationally, that's not good enough. We cannot have the situation where trains internationally are simply not as reliable as ones that run within one country. So that's the heart of the problem which I'm trying to address in this project. It's basically to say, that's the crux of the problem, what are we going to do to essentially solve it? So the project, I'll just show the complete map, that's all the places I'm going and all the trains that I'm taking. The project is to cross all internal borders of the European Union and Norway and Switzerland that you can cross by train in one project. It's about 40 trip days in total, spread over about a 7-week period. I do have a few small breaks in Berlin simply to recover, to highlight the problems and to propose the solutions to those problems. It's worth saying here, as we're at the Heinrich Böll Stiftung, the motivation for the project actually comes from a former German Green member of the European Parliament, Michael Kramer, who used to be the chair of the Transport Committee for the German Greens in the European Parliament until 2019. He wrote in 2015 a report called Missing Links that said, here are 15 projects around the European Union which are very cheap and simple to solve and could improve cross-border railway connections. And in December, I sort of looked, okay, well, what happened to those connections that Michael Kramer had looked at? And I discovered only one of those connections had actually been reactivated. There'd been no progress on the other 14, and the one they reactivated was 2 kilometers of line at the border of Czech Republic to Germany. So I asked myself the question, what can I do about this? And is there some project I could manage to organize that would help improve the public awareness of the problems like this? And out of that came the Cross-Border Rail Project, which instead of just being something basically researching the problems of cross-border rail, would be to go to the borders, see what it's like on the ground, and basically say, okay, look, there's a different way of being able to do this, and better identify the problems there on the ground by seeing them, talking to people, photographing them, and documenting what is happening there. And then, so when there are no trains, I cross the border by bicycle. That means I do about 25 border crossings by bicycle, about 50 by train, and a handful of others by bus, ferry, and foot. So that's basically the breakdown. And there are 4 problems basically at the borders. In some places, the tracks there used to be a cross-border railway line and the tracks had fallen into disrepair. In other places, tracks exist, but passenger trains don't run. So that's basically what was yesterday at the Lithuania-Poland border. In other places, trains run, but the timetables are really poor and no one can use the trains. And the 4th is informational ticketing problems make the whole thing really complicated. Okay? So those are the kind of 4 types of problems which crop up. Every cross-border rail, or more or less every border, has at least one of those 4 problems, right? Depending upon where you are. So I will talk about one example of each. So the first is the cross-border line between Valenciennes in France and Quievrain in Belgium. So that's roughly where it is. And I zoom in on the border. you have here the orange lines and the red lines are where trains currently run, and the black is where the train doesn't run. Now, what you have here is actually a freight line to almost at the border, and then the last tiny bit, there is a gap, right? There is nothing that runs. So that's what that's what it looks like. The lines are not in an operable state, like look at the state of the sleepers and so on here. And this is the line being seen from the other side, right? So basically the overhead wires on the Belgian side end like right at the border. There used to be a track that went through there past those houses, and it no longer is in action. Now, who cares about this one? The EU Agency for Railways is based in Valenciennes, right? And they want to fix this because they would like a train to Brussels. So the EU Agency for Railways invited me to Valenciennes and said, okay, we'd like you to come and have a look at the fact that we don't have a cross-border line. Could you have a look at that? Now, honestly, it's a little bit of a complicated one to solve because you'd actually have to electrify also the freight line, and also on the Belgian side, the infrastructure is not in impeccable condition. But there would be demand, both long distance and local, to connect Valenciennes to Mons. There's quite a lot of cross-border traffic there, a lot of people driving across the border. So there will be plenty of opportunity in that case to do this and to reactivate the line. So there are many of those cases. It would be a comparatively cheap and simple project to be able to organise. Good morning. No problem, all good. So that's the first type of problem. Then the second type of problem, where there is a line, but there is basically no service. All right. So that's what the situation was at the Lithuania-Poland border yesterday. So that's the first border in and out of Poland that I'm crossing. Later in my project, I'm crossing all the other borders in and out of Poland. So Poland, Germany, Poland, Czech Republic, Poland, Slovakia, but they all come later in the project, so I can't yet tell you my conclusions from those. If you want to do a webinar or something at the end of my project for the conclusions for all of those, I'm totally happy to do that, but indeed, Poland, Slovakia comes in day 39 out of 40, right at the very end of the project, so 31st July. So that's very far ahead into the future. Anyway, let's talk Lithuania, Poland. So we have the part here to the border, Mariampole, then Warszawa to the border, and then to Suwałki here on the Polish side. The thick black line is the cycling route that I took, and the thin black line is where the railway line runs, right? So I tried to make sure on my route I saw the railway infrastructure in as many places as possible to get a kind of fair picture of does it work, what it's like, right? So I'm going to talk about all of these pieces, all right? So, leaving Mariampole, there is an enormous amount of investment in the railway infrastructure already. Instead of a level crossing, for example, they built the roads under the railway. There's some major works which were done there, and they've rebuilt all of the tracks at Mariampole station. On the Lithuanian side, as far as Częstochowa, they've relaid all of the tracks with two tracks. One with standard gauge and one with broad gauge for Lithuania, right? To allow broad gauge running of Lithuanian trains through to Częstochowa, the kind of transshipment town, if you like. So at Częstochowa here, actually, it's just cut off. Here is where the platform and the railway building is. But you see, there's some freight going on here, some semi-trailers of trucks that are loaded onto trains here. Trains come in from this side, from Lithuania. The freight gets shipped across from one type of locomotive to the other and then goes off on a standard gauge train on the other side. Now, this is also the station where up until 5 or 7 years ago, if you were traveling to Lithuania from Poland, your Polish train would arrive here and you changed onto a Lithuanian train at this station, all right? Now, today, Częstochowa does not have a single passenger train, right? None, not even trains within Lithuania. Now, it's a small town, right? Whether there is passenger demand that is enough, I don't know, but there is something there. Now, once you're beyond that, you then get to newly laid dual gauge track. From there, as far as the next village, Mokawa, and again, this has been laid new, right, in the last few years, meaning that you can run standard gauge and broad gauge trains then beyond Częstochowa. You get closer to the border, and again, now it's just standard gauge track, and everything is new. Here we have a sound protection wall for one house, right, which has been put up there. Everything is in impeccable condition, right? You then get to the Polish side, and it's a very different story, right? So nothing has been done with the track on the Polish side at all. It is used, but it is not in a good condition. It is still bolted track rather than welded, and it has a maximum speed of only 60 km/h on the track on the Polish side. Yeah, my bicycle is parked up there. This is what the level crossings look like, unguarded, of a very basic but low technology. So what has happened here, and the crux of this issue, which I'm learning from this cross-border rail project, is this is what happens when one side of the border wants to improve things, and the other side of the border doesn't give a damn. Because basically all of this infrastructure is much more important, the whole connection is much more important to Lithuania. It is their only cross-border connection to Western Europe than it is to Poland, which has, I don't know what, 20 cross-border lines to lots of different countries. And Lithuania is not, for either freight or passenger railways, the most important. So basically what you would have to do here, and I haven't got a picture of it as well, there's another crazy situation at Suwałki, is that even if you go there with a freight train, the freight train has to reverse in the station. Now, you could make a very, very cheap renovation to just basically cut the corner. There's even space to build the corner cutting line to facilitate freight flows. It would save every freight train 20 or 30 minutes going through there, but even that 1 kilometer of new piece of track has not been built on the Polish side. So you have a situation where basically, as far as Białystok, there is no progress on the Polish side, nothing. Now, when I have raised this issue with those people building the Rail Baltica project, basically going, look, your problem might be that you get a nice 250 km/h train that runs from Tallinn all the way to Kaunas or even Mariampole or Częstochowa, and the train arrives on the Polish side, and the Polish haven't renovated anything, and then the train goes along at 80 km/h on the Polish side. Now, if you raise that with the Rail Baltica project HQ, they say everything is fine, everything is under control. There's nothing going on there at the moment, or not yet, right? Beyond Białystok, it's okay, because the railway line is being renovated, but I have my worries. Anyway, happy to talk about Rail Baltica if there are further questions about it, but I have big worries about that project in light of the experience, particularly in Latvia, but generally, I think. Right, so that's type of 2. So, sorry, one final point. There will be 2 trains a week on this track from 1st of July, right? So, Białystok to Kaunas Fridays and Saturdays, and Kaunas to Białystok Saturdays and Sundays. So basically a tourist train if you want to go for a day trip to Kaunas, basically, but not a workable service. At the very minimum, what you would be able to do here with the existing infrastructure is at least 1 train and probably 2 trains each way, each day, all right? And there's also a political problem, is the train to operate it is a Polish one, it's owned by Polregio, but they don't really care, whereas the Lithuanians want it, but they don't have a train, right? So you need to have a political compromise in order to make it work, basically. But operationally, it's dead simple. The trains exist, there are plenty of them, it's fine, right? So it should be a simple one to solve, comparatively, if there would be the political will. So that's that one. So that's type 2, where there are tracks but there are no trains. The third example is where there are trains, but they are organized in a way to mean that no one can use them, which sounds completely stupid, right? But it happens. So this is at the border of Estonia to Latvia at Valga-Valka. That's the towns. The purple line is the border, and the orange lines are the railways. The main station is here on the Estonian side. So it's a very nice spot, modern Estonian train arriving here. It's actually a really interesting town. There's the border post, also solidarity with Ukraine. It's a slightly older train that runs on the Latvian side, but it's unworkable as a cross-border railway connection. So this is the timetable from Tallinn to Valga. And so we'll see in a minute why I had to take this train. The train arrives in Valga 11:23. What about from Valga to Riga? Departs 5:13 a.m. or 15:03, right? So you have to take this one, right? And you do the calculation and you see there's more than 3 hours gap in between, right? Now, if you look at it, there is a train arriving 15:26, yeah? Which is less than half an hour after the one on the Latvian side has departed, right? Now, you either make this one go half an hour later, or that one arrive half an hour earlier, and your problem is solved, right? And there were actually quite a lot of people doing what we were doing, right? And we all walked around Valga for 3 hours, and sat and had lunch there.
And that was the issue. The tourists went.
No,
Speak of the domestic demand.
Okay, right. I think you are attributing organizational ability to railways, which is greater than is the case. No, there's a big argument ongoing about who is responsible for this mess. The Latvians say they have, because of building works on the Latvian network, they had to change their timetable, but actually the bigger timetable changes were actually on the Estonian side. So exactly who is responsible here is not altogether clear, but basically no one is really keen, particularly on the Estonian side, to particularly solve this. But there's also a bit of a pity, because Estonian railways actually work much better than the Latvian ones, and the trains are much better and much more modern. So the fact that they don't care about the international connection, I find, is very frustrating. Anyway, so those types of situations exist all over Europe, where the train timetables, train runs, but it's basically a ticking the box. It says, we have an international train, tick box, job done. Yeah? And that's not adequate. And then last but not least, another case which is information problems or reliability problems. So this was the border getting from Stockholm to Oslo. Right? So this situation between those two Nordic capitals is a crazy, crazy situation. So there are supposed to be intercity trains that take 5.5 hours between those two cities, despite the fact that if you put a more modern train on that can tilt in the curves, you could do it in 4.5 hours. So the basic service is already of a poor quality. It was cancelled for 15 months during the COVID pandemic. And now, because there are staff shortages in Swedish railways, what is the first train they cut? That one, the international one. Right? Now, the contrast could not be starker. This is the high-speed train from Stockholm to Gothenburg. It is the most modern, renovated train that the entire Swedish Railways has. It runs a very tight timetable and with a very good average speed between the two major cities within Sweden. Right? So the contrast, the distance Stockholm to Gothenburg is very similar to the distance Stockholm to Oslo, but the difference in the train provision is worlds apart. Now, what did I do? I took this one to Gothenburg and then had to take a bus because there was another information problem. The Swedes have a very complicated system of providing information about their timetables. So the Oslo train was first timetabled, then re-timetabled to depart earlier, then cancelled, and then reintroduced partly as a bus, right? Which was basically all of that happened in my planning within 6 weeks of my departure, right? So it is an absurd situation there in Sweden at the moment because I understand that you might need to replan your trains, but it's sometimes only a week or 10 days ahead that they announce where the engineering works are taking place. So Sweden has been my biggest headache for the planning of the entire project so far, and it's quite remarkable that a comparatively well-financed railway in the end ends up being one that has the biggest difficulties and the biggest problems. It's not on the map, but it must be said probably the best border that I've crossed so far is, however, Copenhagen to Malmö on the Öresund Bridge, because there at least there is a train every 20 minutes, which means if something goes wrong, then you can always take the next one 20 minutes later, which is actually a really good case. But the infrastructure there is impeccable, so that allows that to happen. Right. Just to conclude, so what's happening with regard to the politics? So every day of the project, I am sending postcards, literal paper postcards, 2 a day, to the European Commissioner for Transport, Adina Valian. And indeed, the second postcard then goes to one of the people who's helped my project so far, or has been one of the people who contributed to the crowdfunding of the project. What I'm trying to then do is basically say that the European Union needs to be able to step up to solve some of these problems. Because the European Union has mostly put money into infrastructure, like near Mariupol at the border, Lithuania to Poland, but then doesn't care about actually making sure that any trains run, which is a bit of an insane situation. There are simple solutions for many of the problems at the borders, right? Rebuilding tracks is harder, but when tracks already exist, actually making sure that trains run, it should be comparatively easy to solve. And I want to basically say, and to make the demands of the European Union, that actually these simple, quick solutions should also be implemented. I think it's very important with regard to Rail Baltica that many of the people advocating Rail Baltica actually think that everyday changes now are ignored because our Rail Baltica will solve everything in the future. But Rail Baltica is a long way off still, and if we just basically do nothing through the Baltic countries in the next 5 years because everyone is waiting for Rail Baltica, that's not an adequate or good or complete answer. So what's happening next? How to follow. There are daily Twitter threads about the project. So starting with a video in the morning that explains what's going to happen, updates as I go over the course of the day, videos, photos, analysis of what's happening, and a summary video at the end of the day that basically says, this is what happened and what did we learn from it. All of the route plans, the maps in the background are on the project website, crossborderrail.trainsforeurope.eu, and that's essentially the way means of following. I am on now day 11, which means the project is now just under 1/3 complete. So I've now completed, today I complete the North Loop around the Baltic Sea. Next, on Tuesday, I go southwest, so I get as far as Portugal, and then loop back around to Italy, Slovenia, and Austria, and back to Berlin. And then I do the southeast loop, and so I get then as far through the Balkans, I get as far as Athens. And then come around to then southern Poland at the end of that southeastern loop. And so basically it will be going then from now still until 1st of August. And one final note about Poland, simply because it's for me easy to do because I'm based in Berlin, I have 3 extra days where I'm going to all of the borders, Germany to Poland, just day trips out from Berlin. So there are 6 more borders, Poland to Germany, which with day trips from Berlin I will also analyze. So everything of the Poland-German border will get extra analysis because it's quite easy to do. But that's actually a border where lots of interesting things are happening, which is also a reason why I'm quite happy to go and do that. So that is the project and what I'm doing and why, and some of the conclusions of what I've learned from it. Over to you with remarks, questions, comments, thoughts. I'm open to any of your points for discussion.
I already have one from the internet.
Tell me.
So, Sebastian Wilkins of Train Tracks EU asks, how can we accept that the EU builds a shiny line from Lithuania to Poland for hundreds of millions of euros, but then there is no traffic there? Is there any way for the EU to force the local railways to run trains?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and the answer is not really at the moment in the current legal framework. So you get the money to build a line like that based on an impact assessment of projected traffic flows. Now, I would put money on it. I haven't looked up the impact assessment for that route, but if I were to do so, I would put money on it that it would say there would be a lot of freight and some passenger traffic, but it would be based on that the Polish side were also renovated. So basically, Lithuania can say, well, we can't run anything because Poland didn't meet its side of the bargain, right? So that would be the first kind of situation in response to that. The second point is when I raised this issue previously with the European Commission, basically saying, hey, look, you funded the lines, but there aren't any trains, the European Commission said, sorry, we can't do anything about operations. That's not our responsibility, right? That is the responsibility of the railway companies to do that. And legally speaking is correct. So the European Commission has no legal lever towards the governments or towards the railway companies to force them to run a train. So the short answer to that is, no, there is no legal way. Now, you might then argue maybe there should be one, right? And I'm perhaps actually becoming more in favor of there needing to be one than I might have been before I started this project, right? With public service obligations, cross-border public service obligations for a line like that. Now, behind that question is a point which is, will the train make money or will it ever make money, right? Now the answer is, we don't know, right, at the moment, right? At the beginning, it won't make money, right? We know that at the beginning, but medium term, right? Now, there's an example of the German-Dutch border, Enschede to Münster. Small regional line, no one had any idea it would be a success. 5 years later, they don't have enough trains because it became such a big success, right? Now it can run self-sustaining, right? Now, Mariampol, Suwałki, I don't know, right? So what you maybe need is a situation where you can support a service for some years at the beginning to see what's possible. Now the difficulty with railways, like that one, is they ran a bit of a train, then they changed the train, then they cancelled the train, then COVID came and they cancelled the train. And so it's never been established, right? Now, what we do know, and a final point on that, is there are some routes which will always be profitable, like Paris to Milan, for example, right? There are loads of passengers there, that's fine, right? The market can kind of solve that. But there are lots of railway problems in the EU where, at least initially, the market can't solve it. And in those situations, the places where it is solved, the governments on both sides generally solve it. That's why Western Poland to Germany works. It's not because of the German federal government, it's because of the Land Brandenburg, right? So the region on the German side wants to solve it, right? Now, both sides politically want to solve the problem, so therefore you solve it. Now, this situation is, Poland doesn't want to solve it, the EU can't solve it, the railway operators don't want to solve it, it probably isn't profitable to solve it, so that is a recipe for not solving it, right? So unfortunately that's currently the situation. So the short answer to Sebastian's question is no, but the real answer is it's more complicated. Go for it.
No, concerning this line to Lithuania, I think it can be profitable, as with the solutions that you told. I mean, to put this short connection in Suwałki or things like that. But it would be profitable when Polish railway would concentrate on intermodal transport, because there is a lot of big lorries going from Lithuania to Poland and then further. And this Rail Baltica is supposedly the most profitable when we put those tracks on rail. It's simple as such, but almost never, I think, there was such a service.
The Lithuanians are trying to start it, but the Lithuanians, not Polish Railways,
yes,
not PKP Cargo, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, but it's I would have to go into the Polish politics of transport. Then it's a big story, because in our opinion, I mean, of Polish NGOs, policy is generally betting on building roads, and railway is sometimes neglected because they want the roads to be profitable. But it's a different thing. What I wanted to say also is that we have raised this issue. I mean, my organization, Institute for Sustainable Development, together with CAN and some others in a project Unify. This is a Polish version of a report that has a name, Bringing European Transport Policies on the Climate Neutrality Track. And it was just last year, and we have this recommendation as well to that European Union should have some public service obligations on such tracks that, like here, and probably the money to finance that, at least to start, might be for example from the taxes on air travel. That are already there are already some taxes, at least on air travel. But because this not need to be big money sometimes. to solve it.
Exactly. It should be that would for passenger trains. It should be very cheap to solve. You know? Some places it's more expensive, but there it shouldn't cost too much.
And one more comment to this Rail Baltica, because going a little bit deeper into this Polish politics, there was a huge fight in 2000. I don't remember, it was 7 or 8, about Rospuda Valley nearby Augustów, and this is the road from Warsaw. Let's say this is the place where because Poland wanted to build a road,
Right.
because Augustów has a huge problem with the lorries, because of all of these lorries go from Lithuania and the other states that are Baltic states. So, and this is really a problem that can be solved by a railway, but nobody was thinking in Poland that we should very fastly build a railway and put these tracks on rail. We should be in the road, you know.
But it's just to show, at least, right? So I'm not convinced by the ability to implement, but because LTG Cargo, the Lithuanian cargo operator, it does. Oh wait, one too far.
I'm sorry, because I think I didn't say why.
Yeah.
Szymalski from Institute for Sustainable Development, because we are. I think we don't know each other.
Yeah, just say your names if you want, but bear in mind you also then it will be streamed on YouTube. These wagons here are LTG Cargo lorry trailer carrying wagons. So you basically just lift up the half body trailer and put it down on the wagons. So this is exactly the type which is used with great success between Denmark and Italy, right? So there are daily trains departing from basically the Danish-German border and running with fresh produce, fruit and vegetables mostly, through to northern Italy. And so in a minimal way, right? But the problem here is LTG Cargo, that on the Lithuanian side has very few locomotives that can run on the Polish side. So I must admit, I haven't had in this project, I can't really cover freight very much, right? And indeed, what someone suggested to me on Twitter is I should do a new cross-border rail in the future about freight, which let's see if once I'm done with this one first, of whether that would happen. But at least there's a bit, but the Lithuanians are trying to solve that a bit. Yeah, not enough perhaps, but some. Yeah, and I must say, when I was there, I didn't see in the entire day any freight train that was actually moving. It's not as if there's much happening, unfortunately.
But if you go to Augustów, you've got thousands of
You
lorries
were on that
daily.
road in Augustów, right?
I took the bus from Vilnius to Augustów yesterday, and then the train from there, which was stupid because I had to walk through a forest to get to the train station. But yeah, there was on the main road there were quite some lorries going through.
Yeah.
Thousands of lorries daily.
Yeah.
So,
But anyway, super easy solution if they wanted to do it. Take those well-proven technology for loading the half trailers. Here in Częstochowa, they've even got the right crane to lift them on, right? It would really work, right? And now, like right now, and and getting those wagons is also quite easy. But it's only the Lithuanian side that's trying to fix it.
Michał Stosky, Krytyka Polityczna. I have a question concerning your opinion on the private versus public ownership, because you mentioned the example of the awesome connections where the profit is like very easy to obtain, like you mentioned Paris, Milan. In Poland as well, if you look at like Warszawa, Gdańsk, it's obviously very profitable.
Yeah.
But there are some sort of like connections that cannot be like profitable or rentable, which means, of course, that there is some sort of a market failure.
Yeah.
But and this is the way where the state or some public institution should intervene. But maybe it is like the problem is similar like in the healthcare. If you have dual system, then the private owners like take the most profitable parts of the system.
Yeah.
And the least profitable, like they are left to the public service, which is of course problematic because it costs a lot. Maybe it should be the way that the public actor controls also the very profitable lines in order to have the surplus, like in order to finance like the rest?
No.
Uh-huh.
So, what I've learned from planning this project is there are good and bad public companies running railways, and good and bad private ones. And there are good and bad ways to liberalise a railway system if you want to, right? Sweden is a disaster in that regard, right? Now, so let me take a step back. Why do I say it that way, right? So if you were to take, for example, in my view, there are two very malevolent public operators of railways in France, in Europe. They are France and Spain, SNCF and Renfe, right? They do not behave like publicly orientated companies, even though they are owned by the state, right? So they offer, in Spain in particular, incredibly limited amounts of long-distance routes that don't serve Madrid, for example. In France, the moment an SNCF train crosses just a bit across the border, the prices go sky high, right? Now, they are not, on the international routes in particular, they do not behave like a public service. If they did behave like a public service, I would be more with you, right? Now, the only kind of public service, internationally orientated railway there really is kind of the Austrians, right? Leave the Swiss out to some extent because it's a slightly different system. But Austrian Railways has a public service orientated international approach, and it's a genuinely healthy, publicly owned railway company. Now, I wish you could kind of bottle up what the good you have with Austrian Railways and apply that somewhere else. Now, the other reason why I've got a problem with it is, sure, I'd be fine to have publicly orientated railways, but railways are incredibly nationally thinking, and cooperative models between publicly owned railway companies often don't really work. So if you take, for example, there's a new conclusion between Deutsche Bahn and SNCF for France-Germany cross-border routes, which are actually very underdeveloped, particularly from around Frankfurt towards Lyon and Marseille. You have a very good high-speed corridor there, and it has one train a day, right? The Germans want more trains on that route, but the trains are French, the only ones that can operate as far as Marseille, and the SNCF say, we don't want it. Right? So, examples of where you have two public operators cooperating on international lines, that doesn't really work often either. So ultimately, my conclusion would be, could we demand a European public service railway? Maybe, but it would be a hell of a radical political change in comparison to what we've got. So what I try and do with this project instead is go one layer lower. Basically say, hey, at each individual border, what's the problem and potentially how would you solve it and what can you do about it, right? Now, I would take the example of Italian railways, right, to at least say where it is possibly profitable, at least the passengers benefit. If you look at the cost per kilometer on Milan to Rome, the cost per kilometre is 40% of a cost per kilometre for a passenger on Brussels to Paris, right? Where there is no competition. So it benefits customers where it can work, but there aren't that many places where competition can really work. Now, Trenitalia acknowledges that they are now a better railway company because of the competition from Italo. České dráhy in Czech Republic acknowledges they are a better railway company because of the competition from RegioJet and from Leo Express. So it's a complicated one. For me, competition is not all bad. But when you've liberalised your railway wrongly, like in Sweden, it ends up being a nightmare from a passenger point of view. So just to find out the information, what trains will run or not, and will there be a replacement bus if the train doesn't run, in Sweden it's a disaster. You cannot get this information. So what you need, if you do it, and here Czech Republic has got it right and Norway has got it right, you need a trusted source of information for your entire railway. Basically to make sure that data on what does or does not run is centralized and is trustworthy. So the portals eDosh in Czech Republic and Entur in Norway offer that central trusted information so passengers know what they will get. If you don't have that central source of information, you always end up with a problem. Now, what you could easily demand in the European Union, and I've been asking for this for a long time, is if you run a train anywhere in the European Union, private operator, public operator, whatever operator, you have to put all your data and all your timetables into the central timetable planning, which is called UIC merits. It must be a legal obligation. Every train, data in UIC merits, and at least 3 months ahead of the train running, right? Everywhere and universal. Second, all of your ticketing data available with open data APIs, to basically mean anyone can sell a ticket for any train, right? Now, that would then mean that you could basically build a kind of a portal, like a kind of a Skyscanner or a Kayak or a Podo or something like that for railways. And the third is live running data for all trains that's interchangeable. So each country's live running system's often separate, and it's a phrase in German railways, Verspätung im Ausland, it says. The delay was abroad, right? Like it's kind of a general catch-all, it happened over there and it went wrong, right? Now, a general obligation for live running data. So if the European Union wanted to do something about this, before we answer your fundamental question about public and private, and based on what we've got at the moment, an open data obligation for timetables, ticketing, and live running data, that would be the single biggest, most significant thing without building a new line or buying a new train that the European Union could do pretty much right away. And that would be a very, very significant change. So, sorry I can't give you an answer to that, but ultimately, in my experience, the public-private one is a hell of a difficult one to solve.
Yes.
I kind of disagree with you when it comes to a comparison between private and public running railways. What we are observing now in Poland and in Europe is that the private business is taking the profitable lines only and doesn't care at all for the train from Augustów to Ełk, which is vital to the main lines as it is bringing people from the small countries all around the big main lines to the trains. So they have to take cars to go there.
Yeah.
And these small lines, these additional lines, middle and low traffic lines, will be never profitable. And what we are doing now is giving the profit to the private companies and staying away in the public possession with the lines which are never going to be profitable. So the public has to pay for it and carry the costs to support the private businesses. I do not agree with it that this is a good solution.
I don't think that's true.
Okay.
Because those non-profitable lines are financed with public service obligations anyway. But what's very, very important there, which again comes back to the data point, it's very important that your not profitable train from Elb to Białystok is, if you connect then in Białystok to, I don't know, a Flix train or a, I don't know what, Leo Express train, you need to be able to also combine the data for those operators. Now, and make one ticket out of that, right? Now, that is a problem, right, that you can't, and the data policy and the ticket intercompatibility is very bad from the private operators. So you have to see your network still operating completely as a network, regardless of who is running it. Now, you've got to then come back to the point of how much does a private operator pay to access the track, right? And are they accessing the track at a rate which is fair for covering the costs of maintaining the track, which is still in the public ownership? Now, the argument at the moment is that if those track access charges are too low, then indeed you're correct. Now, at the moment, on most lines, the argument is precisely the opposite, that those track access charges are too high, and that is keeping trains off the track and not leading to an increase in services. Now, I kind of see your point, but there are also many railway routes which would be possible and would be profitable that no one is running. Right now, and there are private enterprises that sometimes see an opportunity. In Germany, for example, from Berlin to Heidelberg, there is no Deutsche Bahn train from Berlin to Heidelberg, quite significant cities. Flix train sees an opportunity and runs the Berlin to Heidelberg. Good luck. Right? I can't have a problem with that. Now, you could basically say, okay, another alternative would be oblige Deutsche Bahn with a public service obligation to run Berlin-Heidelberg. Right? It would also potentially solve the problem. But the German government has not done that, and so a private operator steps in and says, we run Berlin-Heidelberg. And I personally do not have a problem with that. Maybe you have a problem with that.
Well, yes, of course I have, because my approach to the railway traffic as a whole is that this is nothing to make a profit. The purpose of existing of the railway lines is to give people chance to go from A to B on the equal rights. And this is a public service, in my opinion, and not a private business.
Right, but
I'm expecting that my country gives everyone in the small villages and little towns the equal possibility to go to the school, to go to the work, to go to university, to go to the theater and opera, or to shopping to the bigger city which is close. If we make out of the railway transportation a business with a need of profit, we will not service this purpose. Never.
Okay, because
we're not going to agree on that point.
Okay.
I respect your point ethically, but in the practical experience of dealing with railway companies, even the ones that are supposed to run like a genuine public service, that doesn't really fully happen, right? And the closest railway to that, the Swiss one, the only way that is possible is with a public subsidy which is twice the amount per inhabitant of the second highest one, right? Now, you might make a political choice that that is something you want to do, fine, right? But to do that, the step change you need of how much public subsidy you have to pay would be a massive leap. Yeah? Now, maybe we need that, but to me, maybe I'm not utopian enough, but to me that's not coming.
And what if you regulate, like, because the example, because I partially agree.
I'm just getting some more coffee.
Because, well, the problem is that I use this comparison with the healthcare service, where there is a similar situation that the most, so to say, rentable or profitable patients are taken by the private sector, and then the public sector cannot, so to say, earn on them and create any surplus, like to redistribute towards the patients that cannot be profitable, like by definition, because there are those kinds as well. So there is some similar situation, I think, with because you said there can be some lines that are not used that could be profitable. Okay, that's fine. The problem is that there are the ones that actually cannot possibly be profitable, at least in the short term. Like, for example, okay, we can imagine that in 5 or 10 years, a new good train connection would bring about some sort of economic development to the city, but this is a longer term perspective. So in no business plan no bank would give a loan for such a business plan to a private company.
Yeah.
So you need to sustain it publicly, and the question is, if we allow private companies for very profitable connections, like on the line between, if you allow them for to compete with the public sector on the line Gdańsk-Warszawa, they would probably invest heavily in the most modern trains. They would probably crowd out the public ones.
Look at what happened in Czech Republic.
Uh-huh.
The České dráhy improved a lot on the lines where there was a private operator, and improved the other lines too. Mm-hmm. So even the lines to Western Czech Republic where there's not competition, they have improved as a public operator. Mm-hmm. So at the beginning, sure, it was painful, right? But 5 or 8 years later, České dráhy is doing really well, and is also considering international expansion. So if if PKP face competition on Gdansk to Warszawa, it should also itself improve. Right now, or it goes under, and if it can't improve in the face of competition, bearing in mind, right, all of the legacy that it has got, which is to its advantage, workshops which can be used, so getting private companies to maintain the trains, really a big pain. They've got decent trains, PKP, reasonable, right? Any private operator would struggle, yeah. They've got ticket offices and a known brand, which everyone knows how to use it, right? If RegioJet or Leo Express or Flix suddenly started operating on Polish main lines, if PKP lost out to them, I would be shocked, genuinely. Yeah?
And do you know how the competition worked when there were like, because there was a situation in Poland when there were like different public companies servicing the same line, so the there were like actually two instruments to compete. The one was of course price, which is not always good, of course, because you can kill like the company with that. But the other one, and the most problematic, was probably was arranging schedules, timetables, so that your train goes like 5 minutes before the train of the other company.
Yeah. So this is a major. Go on. Yeah.
Say something. We shouldn't focus only on one type of bringing market to the railway, because there are very many different types of bringing market to the railway. You can do it the way you say it.
It was how it was done. It is how it was done.
And it was done, and this way is probably the wrong one. But there are many different ways to bring market, and it depends on the management of the railways in the country, let's say, if there is, or in the region, because in Germany there are many companies that operate on railways, and they don't compete with each other in the way that they don't.
Not really.
They
only Flix against Deutsche Bahn.
They compete in a very different way. They compete that one company has one line, the other one has the other one.
With its
and
competitive tendering.
Is coordinated by the public.
Yeah.
And this is the better way. But still the competition exists, because the competition may be organized by the management by making przetargi ten.
Public procurement.
Public procurement. It's competitive tendering.
Tenders to operate the line. And such things were also done in Poland, and it worked well. Like Kujawsko-Pomorskie did this, and it was better. So and also the tenders can be done not only on lines, but they can be done on a timetable, on a different trains. But the timetable has to be made by a management that is probably public. And totally. This is also the way the competition can go. But of course, we shouldn't allow for the situation that you say, that the public company runs trains like that, and then somebody is allowed to have a train 5 minutes earlier. Well, this is a failure. This is a major failure that we should avoid.
But this is what happened in Poland.
No,
it happened in Poland, but it shouldn't happen, of course. But there are different. But we shouldn't oppose bringing market to the railway. We should oppose bringing market to the railway in the wrong way, and this is what John
and there are
said.
plenty of wrong ways and some more right ways. Yeah.
Well, I am not in opposition to market. I am looking at market like at hammer. If I have a nail, I use hammer. If I have some solution or issue, I will use market for it. But I do not believe that market is able to solve all my problems. And one problem I have in Poland. We have started 30 years ago with 28,000 kilometers of railway lines, which are now 18,000. So market killed 10,000 of kilometers of lines.
Government killed 10,000 kilometers of lines.
With a huge help of market. We have books on politics, and I guess everyone here has been reading it.
Well,
this is my issue.
Yeah, but
Private and the market will not get this line cut it in the last 30 years into running.
But wait, let me give a completely other example. I spend a lot of time in France, and French railways drive me crazy in terms of how it is the worst of a public operator and the worst of a kind of rent-seeking capitalist. It's horrid the way that it works. So the schedules are awful in French railways, right? So with regional trains, they run a few trains in the morning, there's a huge gap in the middle of the day when no one can go, and a few trains in the evening. You can't rely on it, right? The ticket pricing on the high-speed lines, which is just assumed that everyone has a car, because basically most of the TGV stations are built in the middle of nowhere, and you have to drive to get there. The pricing is way above what most people can pay, but it is a public service, and so therefore it has to be protected as a monopoly, right? It is a publicly owned railway, which is miles away from behaving in a publicly orientated manner. Now, and it is, in my view, just plain wrong the way that that is done. Now, what you have to...
One question.
Yeah.
Do you believe the reason why the French railways are run that wrong is only because they are public?
No, it is because it
That's
is
my point.
but it is because it is a malevolent public service operator. Now, and it is also because the politics is wrong to think about how we structure public transport. Now, let's get back to that a second. So, what you need, and this is me being very German in the way of, or German-Austrian in my way of seeing public transport. And this is vital for green policy as well. You have to design your entire public transport in as far as possible, which is basically to say, my life changes and the public transport can still cope. So I don't know, I miss my train, right? It shouldn't be 5 hours until the next one. It should be maximum 1 hour, right? Imagine you live in a suburb outside of Warsaw, and that's where your children live. And you work in central Warsaw, and suddenly your kid falls ill, and you need to go home and pick up your kid at short notice, right? You don't want to be waiting 4 or 5 hours until the next train. You want maximum 1 hour, right? So, public transport schedules in Germany, Czech Republic, Austria, and a bit in Poland, depends on the region, but not in France, not in Spain, not in parts of Italy, not in Romania, not in Sweden, are not built like that. Basically, you have to adjust your life in order to take the train. So it starts with what you want, right? So on any line, a few exceptions, but pretty much any line in Germany, the standard is 1 train an hour at least, all day, every day, from 6 a.m. until 10 p.m. Basically says your life can change and the schedule will be able to cope. The most important high-speed line in Germany, Berlin to Hamburg, 35 trains a day in each direction. The best high-speed line in France, just 21, right? So, if you start with that, to basically say we are going to build our timetable that way, right? And where the lines are not profitable, we will subsidize it, right? Now, a great example is the town of Goslar. It's not so far from Göttingen. Goslar, 35,000 people, to Hanover, 700,000 people, has a train every half an hour at peak, but all day long a train once an hour. Is it profitable? No. How do they organize it? They do a competitive tendering from the Land of Niedersachsen in order to run that line. It works in an adequate manner. Now, that model I would like to see replicated as far as possible. And so you have to start with answering the question, not public or private, but how do you want your timetables to work to get the train network to function the way that you want? Ronnie.
How does this discussion translate to cross-border rail?
Right. So, you've got to ask yourself the question, across a border, who wants to travel there or who needs that train? Right now, so for example, Rzepin, Słubice, Frankfurt an der Oder, for example, there's a lot of people crossing that border every day. Does the train do a good job? No, for those people. It does quite a good job for long-distance business passengers from Warsaw to Berlin, right? The train could be a bit faster, but as a long-distance connection is good. For the cross-border commuters, it's quite bad, right? There are other routes which are similar. Berlin to Prague, the same. Long distance is good, local cross-border connection is quite poor. Another cross-border connection is the other way around, is being rebuilt at the moment, so it's not so good, but at Kostritz. Kostritz into Germany, there's a train every hour, and so actually the cross-border commuters can use the train, right? So you have to ask yourself the question, the cross-border route is, how much cross-border traffic is there? Are there people using it to go to work, go to school, go to university? They need a reliable train timetable. So there, you need to build your structure like a regional train, at least one train every hour, right? And ideally more. Is it long distance? Then maybe a train every 2 hours is okay, but you need to make sure that then your other problems, your timetabling, your ticketing, your information, your reliability are all also then correct. Now, Poland's borders, at least, have got a bit of a mix of all of that, right? At some of the borders, there's quite a bit of commuter passenger traffic. In other borders, it's long distance. And the border to Slovakia is just generally a disaster, and they run on most of the lines only trains in the summertime for tourists, which doesn't seem to be an adequate outcome. So you basically need to ask yourself the question, what type of person takes the cross-border line, and then work out how you would organize the traffic. So for example, Offenburg to Strasbourg, right, the France-Germany border, there should be a lot more opportunity for cross-border trains because there are a lot of people crossing every day, living on one side and working on the other side. So if it's cross-border commuting, you need a different solution than if it's cross-border long-distance trains. And so therefore, Poland has a bit of a mix of all of those, depending upon which border. Szczecin is another, Szczecin is a really good example, because actually now there are Polish people living in Germany and commuting to Szczecin every day. And there's actually some building works ongoing to help provide them a commuter train. So that's how I'd answer that question. There are models you can use, but you need to ask yourself, who could take this, right? Is this an everyday activity or an occasional activity where the people would cross here?
And what are the political problems in making that happen that you see or know about?
So first, on almost every border, one side wants it more than the other side, right? So Lithuania wants it more than Poland. At Haarmont to Weert, on the border Belgium to Netherlands, Belgium wants it, Netherlands doesn't want it. So you don't make any progress. So there I would like to see a kind of a negotiation process from the EU to basically say, look, Netherlands and Belgium, this is a bit insane. You have a track there and there are no trains. Let's sit down and talk and work out how we could solve this one, right? So that's the first. The second problem, which particularly impacts Poland, but not only, is what happens if the national government doesn't want it, but the regions want it. And Germany has this problem as well. So for example, Brandenburg to Poland generally works better than Saxony to Czech Republic, because Brandenburg is more committed to cross-border connections than Saxony is committed to cross-border connections. So you basically, if the federal level can't solve it, can the regions solve it? And often regions trying to solve it is actually not a bad solution, particularly if you're going into Germany, right? Now, Nordrhein-Westfalen is quite good at solving it. Lower Saxony is quite good at solving it. Bavaria, not so convinced. Baden-Württemberg is not so bad, right? So is there a way of solving it one level below the national level? The third is, what happens if the railway company doesn't want to solve it? Now then you've got a headache, right? How do you persuade or force a railway company to intervene, right? Now there we're back a bit to how do you structure the model? Can you do it with a public service obligation? Can you maybe employ some other operator in order to manage to set it up? And that's one of my big fears with Rail Baltica, is they've not got that one clear. Who would the operator even be for the trains on Rail Baltica? And to me, you might need to set up some kind of joint company of the state railways in order to manage to solve a problem like that. So those are at heart the kind of difficulties and problems that you would need to overcome. Now, what can the EU do? Now, I've been very much in favour of the EU, and it comes back to the question that Train Tracks EU posed on Twitter. The EU often doesn't have legal powers to force a train to run, but what the European Union can often do in cases where it doesn't have legal power is naming and shaming, right? So Poland's not in the Eurozone, but those countries in the Eurozone, there was a lot of naming and shaming. Hey, Slovenia, your fiscal policy is wrong, and therefore your budget deficit is too high, right? Traffic lights, indicators, reports, you name it. Now, what I've been advocating is the European Commission should publish an annual cross-border rail index, basically saying, hey, red light here because this doesn't work, yeah? Green light here because suddenly this improved, right? I'll leave you to guess. Ron knows the answer, don't answer. What's the last year, the biggest improvement in a cross-border rail route in Europe? It will surprise you where it is. Have a guess.
Italy, Switzerland.
Nope. The answer is Budapest to Košice in Slovakia. Right? You're like, what? This is crazy. It went from 1 train a day to 7 trains a day. Right? In one shot. Right? Brilliant. Right? Now,
It goes through Hungary. Yeah.
it goes mostly through Hungary. Right? Now, it's by chance, right? They realized they could just run it across the border, turn the train around and send it back, and it was super easy to do, so why not do it? Okay. But it works. Yeah? So it's 98% of the route is in Hungary. Yeah, it's basically a Hungarian train, but they ran it 1 station after the border. Perfect, right? It works, right? Now, it is exactly that type of solution that you could replicate elsewhere. Turmantas, so at the border Lithuania to Latvia, the train waits 4 hours at the station before the border. They could run it to Daugavpils after the border and back in the time available. The trip time is 30 minutes, but they don't, right?
The train is allowed to do it.
The train is allowed to do it as well, right? So you've got to find those types of solutions. So I would like the European Union to then basically go, look, Lithuania, Latvia has a red indicator this year because they still didn't reintroduce the train, right? Hungary, Slovakia, they get a green because actually they achieved big improvements in their service at this border, right? Or what is the best you can do with the infrastructure that you've got, right? Some of the borders I'm crossing, the tracks are old, the capacity is low, you can't do any more, right? I crossed the border Denmark to Germany at Turner to Nibel. No more progress can be made there without building a new line, and no one lives there, so it's max of what you can do, right? There is no business case for more, and no infrastructure for more. It's not perfect, but it is the best you can do with the infrastructure that you've got. And so that basically says, okay, we can live with that. Yeah? So those are the types of ways and means of dealing with those sorts of problems. Is what's the best you could achieve, and how far away from it are you without building a new line or investing in a new train? Yeah? So there's quite a lot of that, more a bit later in the project. I'll try and assess this also at the border, getting to Bohumin, so Krakow, Katowice to Bohumin. There are a bunch of headaches there, also with interoperability. So are you using the infrastructure in the best way that would be possible, right? And there's a lot of Polish borders. The answer to that is sadly no. Yeah. So that's a bit of a long answer to that point, but I hope that answers well enough. Yes?
I have a specific question about connection between Białystok and Kaunas, because we know that we have on table 2 solutions. First is first solution provided by local government and local railway operator. The second one is prepared by national government, which is started from Warsaw to Vilnius. Actually, it's not made it yet. It should be in next year, and probably I'm not so sure they will start from Wrocław. And
Okay.
the question for you, which solution for you is better? Because you mentioned that, for example, if we are talking about cross-border connections between Lithuania and Poland, that Lithuania wants to have such a connections, Poland don't. And when I asked the Ministry of Infrastructure about this, they said, yes, we want it, but we want this connection from Warsaw to Vilnius,
Yeah.
and we don't want connections between Białystok to Kaunas because it's responsible local government. It's not our problem.
Okay.
So, yes.
Okay. So first of all, you can't run to Vilnius at the moment because there's no standard gauge line. You can only run as far as Kaunas. And indeed, the Vilnius-Kaunas line is a strange thing. You can tell the infrastructure is really old, but they're making the very best of it, and they put on a nice modern train. So it's a really nice train on horrible infrastructure, and it's going quite fast, but it's bumping along. So they're really doing a good job with old infra there. So let's only talk to Kaunas. Let's say Warsaw-Kaunas or Wrocław-Kaunas. Right? Now, ultimately, you've got to ask yourself the question, are there going to be through passengers all the way from Warsaw? Probably, yeah. I think quite a lot.
There were 4 buses a day from Vilnius to Warsaw on the schedule yesterday.
Right. So probably. Now, the second then is, when is the Warszawa Białystok line upgrade going to be complete? Because at the moment, that line, half of it is a bit of a mess, right? So I guess 2024, 25? There's a lot of building work still ongoing there, right? Now, the train runs on a single track there, so you might say there's probably in the short term no extra capacity available, probably, yeah? Or maybe you extend an intercity. The third is, what train can run? Now, here there's a big argument, right? Now, I did a lot of research about this. So, the PKP Intercity said they didn't have a suitable train. But the EU Connecting Europe Express, right, this publicity train last year run by the EU, it used the PKP Intercity diesel locomotive, the new PESA locomotive, the whole way to Kaunas, right? So it works, right? We know, we have photographic information that it works, right? And now, what you always get with these kind of arguments with railways is a ton of bullshit where the railways come up with some semi-plausible but actually incorrect technical reason for not doing what they just don't want to do, right? So I think there is no technological reason against the national government's plan, right? You basically run Warszawa to Białystok with an electric locomotive, you add the diesel locomotive on the front, you run it to Suwałki. You then have to put the diesel locomotive on the other end of the train because Suwałki has the stupid arrangement of the station, and you run it through to Kaunas. Right? It's a bit of a mess, but it would just work. Right? It would not be a super pleasant route, but it would just work. Now, the important point, and Ronnie can probably say more because he took one of these trains yesterday. The small regional trains belonging to Polregio, they're not exactly super comfortable or adapted for a trip of 4.5 hours, which is what you'd have to do with the region's proposed solution, right? You need a train that's a bit better and has a bit more space in it. So ultimately, I would say short term, do what the region needs, and medium term, aim for an air-conditioned intercity train that would go Warszawa to Kaunas would be, I think, the best solution. And then longer term, then extend it to Vilnius. But learning from Rail Baltica, I was talking to the guys in both Latvia and Lithuania, the bit to Vilnius will be one of the last parts of Rail Baltica to be completed. The first bit will be Riga to Kaunas, is the general conclusion. So you could probably run your Warszawa to Riga before you would get to Vilnius, honestly. Yeah. That would be a summary of how I'd go about doing it.
And just to add from what I've seen yesterday, taking the local train, that is the same train that will run the weekend service soon again. There were lots of people coming onto the train towards Białystok locally, so the question is there any interest in the cross-border section of the regional beyond the tourists who go to Kaunas or not? I think that will be the question, but you saw on the side of the track that a lot of small local stations are built in
the Lithuanian side.
So if you don't see the border in your head, right, there is an interest for local transport along the entire line. So why run 2 trains when you can run 1 train from Białystok to Kaunas and back? And maybe not many people go across the border, but a few will. and the rest profits from that regional local transport. And then you have a daily or twice daily long distance train for all the tourists or people on the bus yesterday who will sit there for 6 hours, including 1 hour border control yesterday on the bus.
It's not super nice either, right?
So I think there are a lot of people of interest in going from Warszawa or Wrocław to Kaunas as tourists, and there are lots of local people who will take the train. So there's actually a case for both there. And again, I think, why should the regional train, if we consider this a whole regional area, just stop at the border instead of just going for an hour further on?
And also, if you needed extra trains, getting second-hand diesel trains from Germany that are already approved for Poland, super easy, right? There are plenty of second-hand diesel trains you could operate on that route, no stress. So if Polregio says we don't have enough, well, I think they have enough to run 1 or 2 across the border each day, but getting more that could run across that border standard gauge is really easy. The problem further north in the Baltic states with broad gauge trains is you can't get any from anywhere second hand, whereas standard gauge is easy. You can get them second hand from Germany, and ones which are not too old, fully accessible, low floor, very easy.
A lot of them have been bought and brought to the south eastern Poland by private.
Right.
Well, this is really not a company, but it's an NGO.
Okay, right.
It's about it.
Yeah.
And they are going to run this vacation trains.
Okay.
This.
All right, but running those on a regular line would also be perfectly viable. So if you needed to increase capacity for that one, you needed an extra 6 or 10 trains for the cross-border route. You can get them second-hand very easily and very quickly, and that's not the case in many other cross-border routes.
Yeah. You are very happy to go this way. I would like to go with you. Do you have a free ticket?
But it was fascinating yesterday. I'm very glad to have seen all of that with the bicycle yesterday. It was fascinating to see and a bit depressing.
This is a very beautiful.
It's a very beautiful area, and the countryside is wonderful. I had a super nice day cycling. All the stalks on the nests and the forest and the lakes and the small wooden houses. It was really, really nice. Yeah. And there should be some very good tourist potential there as well. And also in the village of Punsk, there was actually really a lot of projects. There was a tourist group that was coming visiting the church. Like there was actually there were quite some things happening on that particular bit on the Polish side. Any more questions, or we draw to a close?
Maybe-
Anyone online?
Maybe the last
Go
one.
for it.
I have a question about your feelings about Rail Baltica. Which distance is the worst? Because we have information from Polish expert that Polish version I would say of Rail Baltica is the worst from the others.
So Rail Baltica is a nightmare, right? Like from start to end. It's really geopolitically really important, and in passenger and freight operations should make great sense, right? Like as an idea, totally in favor. The practicalities, meanwhile, oh my god, right? Like at every possible thing to make it work is complicated. Land possessions, particularly in Estonia, routing through Riga and routing to Riga airport, how to include Vilnius because the line is not really routing through there, and the political commitment from all parts concerned about what to build when and how, and the project management. The biggest headache of all is the procurement of 250 km/h passenger trains to run on the line. The project organisers of Rail Baltica say, we are only building the track, we are not procuring the trains. Good luck finding a market who will suddenly go, we've got a fleet of 250 km/h trains, because no private player, in my view, will take that risk. We don't know, really, how many trains will run on the Rail Baltica route, passenger-wise, and when, or what the passenger numbers will be. not least because we don't know what the infrastructure is going to look like on the Polish side, or if it will even be upgraded in time. Now, at the very minimum, what should happen, but it doesn't look like it's yet even beginning to happen, should be double tracking the line all the way from the border to Białystok, right? At least, and electrifying it. As an interim solution, at least improving the track and electrifying it from the border to Suwałki, and then electrifying but probably not replacing the track, which is 100 km/h, the track is not so bad south then to Białystok. So it strikes me that what instead is going to happen, so the two countries most committed to it and making most progress are Lithuania and Latvia at the moment. You will get some kind of back and forth train running between Kaunas and Riga, first of all. The next bit will then be Riga to Tallinn. The third bit will be Kaunas to Vilnius, right? That it will come, I'm pretty sure, in that order. And the fourth bit will then be the Polish bit, which is a bit crazy because actually what Poland only really has to do is upgrade lines rather than building new lines. But that will probably be the last bit to complete. And my biggest fear is some part of the tracks is built and there are no trains to run on them because they didn't procure any trains. Because if their schedule is correct and they want to open the first bit 2027, you need to order the trains now, because the only manufacturer of trains that can deliver you a 250 km/h train are basically Siemens, Alstom, Talgo and CAF, and they all have order books which are basically already full for the next 5 years. So if you don't order trains now, you won't have trains to run on your line in 2027. Now,
We've got
maybe
our Polish manufacturers.
like Pisa, Newag and Siglinski are not going to build some 250 km/h trains, I'm pretty sure, right? 160?
They are working on it.
Okay, do you believe them?
Well, at least there is a plan. There was once shown. They were competing with the Pendolino.
Okay.
In the
In-
Pendolino process,
okay.
but it didn't work.
Okay, maybe, right? They're now building 200 km/h locomotives for PKP, right? Neowag are building those, I think. I can't remember who's building
Yes.
those. Yeah. Okay, maybe 200 km/h they can do. Now, maybe in an interim you run a 200 km/h locomotive on the line with some carriages, maybe. But to me that's a really, really big error. They need to set up like a joint company of all of the railway companies for the route, and organise a solid procurement of a fleet of at least 20 trains to make it work. But they basically go, the market will fix it, and it probably won't.
How long would be the whole line? Warsaw, Tallinn? How far is it?
800 km or something?
800.
Yeah, something like that, 800, 850.
So maybe 200 kph maybe would be enough.
Well, yes, but then you're not using it. It would be okay. They're basically
4 hours from Tallinn to Warsaw. Well.
Yeah, well, if it were all 200, right? It's only 160 to Białystok anyway. But so as an interim, okay. But if you're building a 250 km/h line, you may as well procure some 250 km/h trains to run on it, right? Would seem most logical. What I don't want, and that's my fear, right, seeing those villages on the Lithuanian side already with a new line but no trains, is you lead to a political disenchantment that you plough public money into a project which is not serving the interests of people. And that's my fear, is that you're not adequately delivering. You had a question?
I have a question. We have spoke about people going anywhere.
Yeah.
How is this picture or this thinking changed when we add cargo to it?
For Rail Baltica.
Yeah.
So
And for trans-border railways in Europe in common.
right. So for Rail Baltica is ultimately, when it is complete, right? It has to be completely complete, right? It's then, or maybe not to Estonia, but whatever. It's got to be complete to Poland properly, an electrified line to maximize the freight potential. And then there's huge freight potential, which is really good. But that only works if the Poland bit is done with an electrified line. The further north you go, the less the freight potential, right? There'll be some coming from Tallinn, more from Riga, more from Kaunas, but basically it's coming down, the freight, basically. European rail freight is in a really weird situation at the moment. There are some really good developments and some awful situations. So, to me, the really interesting thing is the Nordic through to Mediterranean corridor, right, where rail freight works comparatively well. The infrastructure needs a bit of improvement, but you've had lots of different and quite competitive operators who've been offering different services on that corridor. So there's a problem in Germany that there's some places the capacity is not adequate to deal with the demand. There are other parts of Europe, notably France and Spain and some parts of Italy, where it's the other way around. There's enormous amounts of capacity, but there is no rail freight which is running. And you also have in France and Spain the old network, the low-speed network, where all the passenger trains move to the high-speed lines. The low-speed network could be very successfully deployed for freight, but it's not. Now, the state operators are not keen on running freight, and the private operators that would be keener can't get in. Now, there's also the absurd situation for France as well, that the most interoperable locomotive that there is, Siemens Vectron, which is approved in Poland, and indeed PKP Cargo owns some of them, is not approved for France. So these fleets of locomotives, which are basically approved to run pretty much Europe-wide, can't go to France. So a lot of it is north-south through Central Europe. There is solid progress. Also towards the east, some. Now, I must admit, at the moment, I am not a freight specialist. I am aware that it is not, it's a kind of a blind spot in my knowledge. But it is one which I'm very conscious that I want to look at further in the future. And then there is one thing that, just a note on this, that the European Union is financing, which is a brilliant project in freight. And it sounds really boring, but it's really good. It is the European Digital Automated Coupler, it's called. So, couple two freight wagons together in Europe today, and you do it the old way. You need a guy who comes and chains the wagons together and uses a huge spanner to tighten up the chains between the carriages. Physically hard work, time-consuming, really slow, and very old-fashioned. Now, and dangerous, right? Yeah, because if something goes wrong. Now, they finally established last year the protocol to replace that entire system with an automated coupler. It's a bit like if you couple two small regional trains together. You see it has like a coupler in the middle, which can be coupled and decoupled automatically, and everything goes through the coupler. So it's the force, it's the braking pipes, and it's also the train control systems all go through the coupler. And then you can couple them together automatically, and you can send a digital signal to the coupler to decouple them automatically as well. So this will be a transformation in European rail freight that when by 2030 the aim is, although that's very optimistic, all freight wagons in Europe are to be equipped with the new coupling system. And that will then basically mean that you can put together and take apart your freight trains enormously more quickly than you can do at the moment. Now, I'm meeting in Tabor, in the middle of nowhere in Czech Republic, on my project, the guy who is the coordinator of this project, a Czech gentleman called Libo Lochman. And so this, to me, is one of the most worthwhile things that the European Union is doing in railways at the moment. It basically takes a well-known, years-long problem. Everyone's known this needs to be sorted out because railways in both Russia and the United States already have a better solution for this. But the EU has basically said, actually, we're going to go one better. We're going to develop a system which has an automatic decoupling, which both Russia and the United States don't have. You put the wagons together in those countries and they couple automatically, but you need to remove a latch to decouple them. The EU is going to have an automatic coupling and decoupling system with the digital automated coupler. And so it is an EU project that to me is very, very good. It makes a lot of sense for freight. And so there I can give you a good story of that the EU has coordinated this one. Yeah, so that's the one to keep an eye on. Sounds kind of boring, but in terms of practicalities, really good.
What I'm taking from this story is a proof that European Committee is able to organize and regulate anything in the railway traffic, personal or cargo, if they want.
If they want.
If there's a political will.
If they want. Now, it's very, very important. I don't know how it is in Poland, but it's definitely the case in Germany, it's the case in the UK where I'm from, and it's definitely the case in Brussels, is Commissioner for Transport or Minister for Transport is not really the job that anyone wants. In Germany, it tends to be the job you give to the guy, it's always guys, sorry, you give to, in German transport policy, you give the job to the person you don't know what else to give them. Right? It's the final job. You can, oh hell, we have to give this person something. Let's make him or her transport minister. Right? And in the European Commission, it's a bit the same. It's not the job that anyone really wants. Right? So the current European Commissioner for Transport, Adina Vălean, was the second choice to be Romanian Commissioner in the first place, and didn't want to do transport. Right? So that is the reason then of why it often doesn't work so much. Exactly your question is, how much commitment is there from Adina Vălean to really solving these problems? Not so much, right? Now, what I'd really like to see is also in the European Parliament as well, where there's some difficulties and tensions in the Transport Committee, is hopefully we will have more and slightly better politicians in both the Transport Committee in the European Parliament and Transport Commissioner after the European elections in 2024. There is one Polish point here as well. There is a Polish Social Democrat, Mr. Liberadzki.
Oh God.
Yeah, exactly. He was rapporteur for the passenger rights regulation, which concluded last year. And that piece of legislation is an absolute disaster. Basically because the state railways lobbied him to make sure that as little as possible changed. And so he did a very, very bad job in the European Parliament on that particular piece of legislation. So someone from Poland that's not Liberadzki in the Transport Committee medium term, that would be really a positive step forward.
You know, there's a funny thing. He is one of the guys who are mostly responsible for something that was called, or called because I'm from a group which published a book by Karol Tramer, Polish independent expert on railways. The book is called The Sharp Cut.
Okay.
And this is about how big part of what was mentioned here, like this 28 to 18.
That's the guy
kilometers.
who was closing Polish railways.
Yeah, so this is the guy who cut a lot of, a huge part of that.
Right, so for example, there's a big argument in European railways about through ticketing, right? So imagine you have a PKP train, then a Deutsche Bahn train, then an SNCF train, right? It's pretty much impossible to book, I don't know, you want to book Warsaw to Paris, you can't do that in one transaction, right? Now, at the moment,
Unless it's Deutsche Bahn.
they can't even do that properly to Paris, or sometimes, right?
Or to Brussels.
Yeah, to Brussels it can go, right?
Because they have IC.
So you have to have 3 tickets or 2 tickets, something breaks down in the middle, you miss your onward connection, and because you have 2 tickets, you're basically stuck.
And
right?
you cannot get even the...
And you can't get reimbursement, whatever. So, a lot of people in Brussels said, no, hang on, it's too technically difficult to assume you can book 1 ticket, so instead what you need is a kind of a guarantee. If you have many tickets, you can still take the next available train, right? Basically a kind of a connection guarantee, right? It would be the simplest way of solving the problem. Why have we not got the connection guarantee? Liberadzki. Yeah? Because the state railways didn't want a connection guarantee. Liberadzki listened to the state railways, and that's why we don't have a connection guarantee. Right? Now, that would be a very, very worthwhile thing. To basically say, sorry, through tickets is too complicated, but at least if something breaks down, you can still hop on the next train. But unfortunately, the EU messed that one up.
Okay, we can talk for hours.
Anyway, apologies. Right, thank you all for coming. Very interesting debates and discussions. Let's maybe try and organise a webinar at the conclusion of the project while I do filling you in on the other Polish borders.
When you go from Slovakia to Poland.
Yeah, when I go from Poprad to Muzina. the
That's a tourist train only.
right, yeah, it only runs in the summertime and only on weekends. It was quite
Yes,
difficult
yeah.
to plan to route
Yeah,
onto
it
that
was
one.
only-